Good afternoon. This is Paranormal Science Live. This is Lisa.
I'm Susan.
And I'm Jim.
It's a great afternoon. It's February and it's actually sunny and halfway warm.
It's very warm out.
And I'm happy to have Jim and Susan back. It's been a while.
It has.
But we are just going to chat today and talk about spirit and energy and how spirit uses energy and how it affects us and how we perceive it. You want to start out?
For me personally, I can always tell because my ears pop. Sometimes I'll hear a really high pitch squeal in my ear, but sometimes it's almost as like I can only hear out of one ear. It's that strong. And it will sound almost as I'm going through a tunnel. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it'll make you kind of step back a second and kind of shake your head like, what just happened? I notice more when I'm out in public that it tends to do that more for me. What about you, Jim?
I don't know that I notice it as much in public, although the few times I have, I call it the Scooby-Doo effect. When you see an energy shift, it looks like, if you've seen the, Scooby-Doo where the wavy lines or the end of Wayne's World when they do the Scooby-Doo ending, that's best way to describe it. I know when we're in locations, static electricity a lot of times, your hair will stand up on end. And sometimes you just feel it. There's no way to really describe it. You just feel it as, a pressure or you just feel an energy. It's kind of hard to describe.
I know. For me, sometimes I will get a ringing in the ears, that kind of thing. But I do see energy shifts in the air, and for me, it's distortion, almost like heat coming off of asphalt in summer.
That's another way.
Yeah, and then sometimes they'll, will almost look like a sort of a shadow person, but not fully formed. Mm-hmm. But for me, I feel it a lot in my face, a tingling especially if you have high EMF. Mm-hmm. I think partly when you do this long enough and you're in enough locations, you just sort of figure out how a place with activity kind of feels.
Yeah.
You can just walk in and feel it. People tend to call it heavy or whatever, but it's a little different than atmospheric for me.
My cheeks will get really red and warm for me. And sometimes I have that feeling of the person is so close to me. Mm-hmm. It's like I can feel their whole body pressure against me. And it's usually always on my back. Almost as if they're breathing down your neck kind of feeling. And when you definitely can feel the presence of someone else there. It's very heavy. Mm-hmm. Even though I personally can't see it, I don't have the whole wavy lines or that kind of, I can just feel it. And sometimes it'll make me almost feel like I can't breathe.
I get pressures in different parts of my body with it sometimes.
Well, and I think too, when we describe the heavy feeling in a room, there's unfortunately a lot of the paranormal shows, I won't name any names just because there's so many on, but they always want to seem to go toward the negative type when they feel heavy in a room, and that's not necessarily been our experience in the places that we investigate. The heavy feeling just means there's an energy change, and sometimes it's the spirit trying to draw energy, and it just makes it feel heavy. I mean, knock on wood, we've never, in the almost 2 years Susan and I have been with the team, we've never ran into anything negative.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the shows, it seems like every investigation they're on, there's some type of negative entity, meaning non-human. So far, we've never always ran into just human ones.
Well, and I've kind of dubbed it the puppy effect, because it's very much of I'm here, look at me. Kind of let's play. That kind of very excited, very anticipated energy, like oh my gosh, you guys are here, yay! That kind of feeling. Yeah. Versus anything, I've only felt kind of a negative presence maybe once or twice, but typically for me, it's more of hey, you're here, all right,
and you sense me.
Yeah, it's a very happy, very the puppy effect.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree with you, and I I've dealt with a couple of things that were inhuman, and it's definitely different, and I think that most people who think they're dealing with something inhuman aren't. Generally, it's a human spirit that either is angry or just cranky or whatever.
Well, you're cranky in life, you're going to be cranky after.
Exactly, and I think that is a lot of it, and people misperceive that. And I think media has done that even way before the paranormal shows. It used to be movies that portrayed hauntings and everything. People worried about is it something like The Exorcist or something like that, versus this is just something that happens. And I think that most people who become aware that they're in a haunted place, they deal with it a couple of different ways. Either they kind of freak out, get scared, or some will just totally rationalize and know this isn't happening, that's something else, or kind of a middle road of, okay, I just deal with this. I was talking to someone I know yesterday, in fact, that I've known him for years, and he just brought up the subject that he used to live in a house that was haunted, and how he dealt with it, because they would bother him during the night and wake him up, is he slept with earplugs and a face mask on, a sleeping mask on. And it was like, and I asked him, I said, did that work? And he said, when he did that, they didn't bother him. And so, but if he didn't, they were waking him up all the time. So, and this is someone that's very rational, very credible. So I just think people decide how haunted they're going to be with it too.
That's very true.
If I'm tired enough and they wake me up, which happens on a nightly occurrence, I just politely ask them to stop, that I really need the sleep, and go back to sleep, and normally the rest of the night I'm good. I mean, we've investigated our house, so we pretty much know the spirits that are there. I think we have some that come and go, but I think the ones that like to wake me, pretty much when I ask them to leave me alone, they do. I think, to me, as long as you treat that energy with respect, you're going to get the same respect back a lot of the times.
Well, 99% of the time they're there watching or just there.
Something I've noticed too, since being involved heavily with the team and doing more studying and more researching. When we talked just a minute ago, wanted to take it kind of back there for when kids come up, and kids feel it different than adults do, and we all know that. I also think that it's because the reason why kids see it more so than adults do. Of course, number one, we're jaded. Number two, and I know I've done it as a mother. You're busy and you're trying to do something, and your kid's like, hey, and you're like, just okay, whatever, go away,
wait a minute,
just a second. And if they tell you, hey, I saw this or I've seen this, and very quickly you'll say, no, you didn't, you're making it up, So all those kids that have had the
can you still see it? I was hoping the camera could see it.
All the kids that have had that imaginary friend, because of the readings that I've done now and the more studying that I've done on it, they're not necessarily imaginary.
No.
And you have to, I think for myself as a parent now, if I had it to do over again, I would say, okay, who's your friend? And Jim and I happen to have a goddaughter that has seen a whole lot of stuff that we can verify, because there's things that she's seen and people that she's described prior that have passed away prior to her even being born.
Right.
So and not known names or pictures, and now she's only 5, so it's not like she's going to remember a whole lot of pictures or names that she sees anyway. So
right.
I think that's kind of interesting too, how the kids feel it versus how adults feel it, and even animals. Animals feel it differently than we feel it. It's crazy the different ways, and if you pay attention to your animal or animals, I've personally seen a horse just standing in the middle of the field, and immediately, and I know there wasn't a snake there or a rodent or something like that scared it off. It just immediately jumped and took off running as fast as it could go. So, you kind of have to ask yourself what you're willing to believe and what you're not willing to believe, I think. Like you were saying, how haunted do you really want to be? And
I think, because sometimes I think really it's more an issue of the person being haunted. There's energies virtually everywhere. And there can be hauntings and spirits all kinds of places. And we walk through life encountering that all the time, and so I think it is a matter of how much should we pay attention and how we let it affect us. But I think with kids and animals, they don't filter the way that adults do, and they just accept what's there. And I think my experience with kids is if they have an imaginary friend, they know it's an imaginary friend, and they'll create that friend, for companionship or just if they're bored or whatever. But if you've got a kid that's insistent that they see this friend and describe them and that kind of thing, that's when you say, well, maybe they are seeing something that you aren't. And kids do see further into the light spectrum than we do as adults, and actually hear lower frequencies than we do for a time period. So it's easy for us to discount, but it doesn't mean.
Yeah.
And the question I have is, Susan, you have recently in your adult life come to terms with having gift and being aware of spirit and energies. How has that affected you, and how do you think is a good way for people to adapt? Because there are times that people say they move into a house that has a lot of activity, and that's when they start realizing that they are sensitive and have some gift.
Well, it's very surprising, to say the least. I don't know. I would have to say, for me personally, coming to terms with it was really rough for me, because it seemed like once it happened, it just flooded through in different ways. Whether it's empathic or, however, I can't remember all the. Jim knows I don't.
Yeah.
The only thing, you're not clairaudience because you don't hear the sounds.
Yeah, I don't ever hear anything. Unless it's a door slamming or
something really loud.
Something that's
it's not something that I'm just myself is going to hear. For me, I personally see things play in my mind like a slideshow, and typically it's very detailed. And it seems like it's when Spirit really wants me to focus in on something specific. And I recently was challenged, and I say it's challenging because to me it's almost like a game because they know that I know, so they're going to test me and to see if I can get out what they really want me to get out for them. And I was surprised myself. It kind of shocked me myself. And the reason why I say this is because I happened to be on the phone with someone that I was speaking with regarding some past loved ones, and the person I was on the phone with was sending pictures to another person next to me, so there was no way I could have seen the pictures or whatever, and was able to validate that way. So it was quite interesting. But for someone that is just learning to accept what comes along with that is patience, which is I don't have a lot of, and just being open, but still, protecting yourself and going with your gut feeling. If it's something that makes you uncomfortable, don't invite it in. Don't just leave it alone. Don't mess with it. Don't, don't even validate it.
Right.
But you'll start. I think you'll know, regardless whether it's the puppy syndrome or it's somebody that's kind of cranky and just wants to come through. And sometimes I think they want to come through, they want to get validated, and then they're out.
Right.
It's really interesting for me when it happens to me in public, and it's immediate to go to someone that I don't even know. And I know there's TV shows out there like that too, and it's really funny to watch that happen. And then it happened to you, and at first I thought these people are going to think I'm crazy. And so then I tested it. I just decided to test it, and I did, and the lady validated everything that I had said to her, and she just looked at me like, who are you? And how do you know that? And I just said to her, I don't know how I know it, I just know it, but take this with you, whatever information this is for you, and do what you will with it. But it's interesting for sure how to handle that. I don't know that two people would handle it the same way.
No, I don't think so. And I think, of course, abilities are different for different people, and there are different types of abilities. So, but I think the biggest thing is, I think our society teaches people not to trust themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure.
Not to trust their own instincts.
Well, and unfortunately, I think even though Susan and I are religious, I think religion plays a lot of part in people not necessarily trusting their abilities if they have them, because they're taught not to.
Right.
Reading tarot or divining spirit is of the devil.
Right.
And if there's any Christians listening and you didn't want to disagree, Susan and I are very strong in our religious beliefs, but she still does what she does. And I believe it's a God-given ability. I mean, I could make some people really mad by saying that, I've read numerous articles that Mary herself was a seer. Mm-hmm. There's passages in the Bible where Jesus actually went and talked to psychics, so to speak. Mm-hmm. It's not the words that are used in the Bible, but I mean, so it is what it is. And I know living with somebody with the gift, I think the hardest part that I saw her going through is not necessarily being able to get the validation, and when she had opportunity to, like she said, being scared that she was going to look like as some weird person walking up to it, because I've seen her do it twice now. Both times it was in a casino. One time was our waitress, and the lady sobbed because Susan was spot on with who it was, and then another lady was just playing a slot machine, and for some reason Susan felt drawn to her. And
well, I walked by her, and immediately,
and Susan read her on the spot, and everything she said. So I think that's helped, Susan being able to get the validation?
Well, I think I've had experiences since childhood, and I think the biggest thing for me was, as a kid, I started figuring out not everyone, had the same sense, but for whatever reason, fairly young, I just kind of took the opinion, well, I don't, no one thinks I'm crazy, otherwise or anything, so I just accepted what was, it's there. And I kind of view it as it's no different than sight or hearing or touch or smell. It's just there. And if you want to look at it from a religious perspective, I look at it, if God gave us those other senses, then He had to have given us this. Correct. So
it's the same instinct as to protect yourself.
Yes.
When you feel danger, it's that same instinct. It's that same gut feeling. It's that same reaction. It runs along that same, and I believe it comes from the same area of the brain.
I think you're right too.
And if you walk into a room and you can sense something's wrong here, okay, you can use that in other aspects of being, of having a gift or being psychic or however you want to call it. That's the same part of the brain that has that reaction. It's the same reaction.
Yeah, it's just a little more refined version of it.
Well, I've read one of John Zappas' new books, so I won't throw some names out here because these are some of my guys that I really like to go to for stuff. I'm reading Stephen LeChance's new book. I've read some of Chip Coffey's stuff. And they all talk about, even though if you don't have the gift, so to speak, we all have intuition. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't listen to that intuition enough, that gut feeling. Because how many times have you walked into a situation and your gut has told you one thing, but you've went against it, and something has actually happened that your gut told you to stay away from?
I always mess up when I don't follow my instinct.
Yeah, and who's to say that that's not because, I think most of us on our team believe that we all have spirit guides, whether you want to acknowledge them or not, whether it's a past loved one, somebody from a past life, whoever it might be. That gut feeling may be from your spirit guide saying, hey.
Pay attention.
You're not paying attention to it. And I know Susan and I have tried to practice more of, if we're walking into a situation and it doesn't feel right, we try to shy away from it, or, to use a psychic type term, we try to surround ourselves with a positive light to try to block out whatever negative we're feeling about a situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's two things I wanted to add to that. Number one, unfortunately, we live in a society now that we are told, don't trust yourself. Mm-hmm. Don't, somebody else is going to take care of whatever problem you have. Mm-hmm. If you don't like it, we can provide a quiet room for you.
Right.
Okay. Number one, that's not realistic.
Right.
Number two, I was sitting with because of my profession that I do, I was sitting with one of my customers, and she was telling me, she said, and she knows that I do paranormal work, and she said to me, she said, have you ever looked up at the moon and closed your eyes and just thought, and I'm like, well, what'd you see? Because I was like, I know where this is going.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, I do it all the time, and I said, and I'm very much a believer in, I'm an earth element, so I know that when something is wrong and how I feel, if I'm feeling kind of yucky or whatever, I can go outside and take my shoes and socks off and get my feet on the ground, and within seconds I will feel better. And I will call on the four elements to take away whatever yucky is with me, and it really does work. But she said, have you ever closed your eyes or looked up at the moon and closed your eyes and saw things? And I said, well, yeah, heck yeah, I have. What'd you see?
Yeah.
And she said, well, I always see myself. And I'm like, oh yeah? And she's like, yeah. And I said, well, what do you see yourself doing? And she said, well, it's always in like this time period that she's like, I have this big dress on. And I said, so it's Victorian. And she's like, yeah, it's kind of Victorian. I'm like, interesting. And she said, what? And I said, well, I think you're seeing your past life. And she was like, are you kidding? You know, and it was really funny. And I said, you need to, you know, be more aware of what you're dreaming and be more aware of, you know, when your mind just wanders and you're just sitting there driving along and you're all of a sudden you're in a place and you don't remember the drive from that place to that place, try to think back of what you were thinking about then, because a lot of times that's your brain taking you back, or you're seeing where you once were. Yeah. So, that's what I wanted to add to kind of what you guys were saying.
Yeah, but don't you think if you go back to our topic, that's spirit energy trying to help you realize, you know, that, you know, you have had past lives and, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I do. And you know, I mean, it's, I agree completely. And I've had experiences where I would have repetitive dreams and sometimes of a place or a building or a house or something, and something I've never been, don't know where it is, that kind of thing, and years later I'm there, and it's like
very deja
vu, because and to be perfectly honest, my house is one. I mean, I dreamt of this house as a kid all the time. I would be standing in front of it, but it was in a prior time, painted slightly different, and the newer houses around it not here. And it was, when we came to look at it, got out and stood on the sidewalk and, oh wow, you know, because it was, the details were perfect. And you know, that's, you know, certainly odd. But I think part of the problem, and it's not necessarily a problem, but as society has relied more on logic and science, you know, we have gotten to the point, well, you know, if I have a sensation or a random thought, you know, people think, I can't trust it because, you know, I can't subject it to the rigors of science, because, and you know, and I'm a big believer in science, but everything has a place, and just because we embrace science in so many ways in our life, I don't see how it's incompatible to embrace our own instincts, and I think that's where people kind of get tangled up.
Well, wouldn't you say? You know, you were talking about it's as much there as sight, taste, smell, sound. Would that technically be considered another sense?
Yeah.
Is your intuition.
Exactly. I mean, as I say, the sixth sense, that's exactly what it is. It's just not as universally discussed or experienced. And I suspect a lot of people do experience it a lot more than they let on. And I have people in my family that have been that way, you know, that they had experiences and knew things, etc., but just discounted it. And then a couple of them have had some very intense experiences that they finally said, well, I can't ignore that. You know?
We have a daughter that went through that, and she's now accepted that. That's what it is, and she'll tell me, you know, Mom, you know this or you know that, but I'm so unsure or I'm unaware, and I'm like, you just have to slow down and you just have to listen to, you know, what it's telling you, and just go with it. I mean, for me, whenever. To me, sometimes it's gotten to the point now where it's fun. It's still scary, and it still takes me back sometimes. But now it's fun when I'll be talking to someone, and and I don't just go up to random strangers. I've only done that twice. But I'm not saying it won't happen again, but as of right now.
And she doesn't have producers that ask questions beforehand.
No. Well, and you can't believe everything in the media either, okay?
That's right.
I was in the media for 10 years, and you can't believe everything that's in the media. But anyway, for me, what happens is, like I say, I don't audibly hear anything, and I don't physically see anything. Like I said, it's like kind of like a slideshow that kind of plays in my mind, and it's very quick and it's very fast. But it's when a random name pops up and or a letter, and it always does it when I'm talking to someone, and I'll say, for example, and I'll just use Jim because he's sitting here, and I'll just say, hey, who's Jim to you? And they'll be like, what, and I'll say, I keep getting the letter J. I don't know what that's significant for, but, something with the letter J. I don't know if it's a date or if it's a name or what, or sometimes I do get just random numbers or something. And sometimes it won't have anything to do with the person I'm talking to. It could be the person that's like 4 aisles over or whatever.
Right.
But, now I'm able to go, oh, okay, and just kind of, I hear you, or I acknowledge you, and then I'm, I'll say, but I'm in Walmart and I can't do this right now. I have to get milk and go home. Which, let's be truthful, I don't go to Walmart by myself typically. He goes. But, it's just so different than how I think it's neat to watch you because you can physically see the energy change, and there are times where you and I have been together and you've seen an energy change, and then I won't feel it for like 30 or 40 seconds later, right. And then I'll feel it. But that's what I've kind of noticed, is that how it's different for other people. So, and how it's different for me.
I think the weirdest time I ever saw it was in Walmart, and
well, it is Walmart.
Well, I know, but it was that heat effect, Scooby-Doo, whatever you want to call it, was actually next to a person pushing a cart, walking right alongside with them. And I looked at Susan, and I'm like,
mouth open.
She didn't.
I block it out.
See it, and I'm like, that, because most of the time I've seen it has been at Kendrick House. We see it a lot there.
Yeah.
Just above the table or over in a corner or something, we see it. I've never saw one that was basically person-sized. And actually walking along with somebody. And it's like, okay. That's interesting.
It can be, and I've had experiences and that I chalk up to probably past life, that sometimes I've run into people that I wonder if I've encountered them before, because when usually I haven't, it's either first meeting or shortly after that, all I can say is spirit steps out for a minute, and I see the energy, and I see that person, presumably from another lifetime, different period, dress, etc. And they don't look the same necessarily, but it's like they'll just step out and say, "Hi, this is what I looked like," and step back in. And I've had that happen, and then sometimes, talking to that person, I'll find that they have an affinity connection to the time period that I saw, whether it's, Civil War or, Roman. I've encountered that before, where someone, it almost looked like a Roman centurion, and this was someone that had, a deep interest, always had, in that time period, and even said, that they weren't sure why. But, so I can't explain, no, we can't say for sure that's what it is, but that's what it seems to make sense for. And especially when those things line up like that.
Let me throw this question out there, because this has happened to me, and I know it's happened to you and I together. Do you find it easier to recognize someone else that has that ability?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I've had a number of times in my life where people will make a comment, and sometimes I might be checking out at the grocery store or something and get a comment that just is like, oh, oh, yeah.
It's like you knew before I knew, and I had a girlfriend of mine several weeks ago.
It's Cameron.
Oh, I forgot he was here.
Several weeks ago, and her and I have been friends for years. And our girls were little together, and our girls are all grown and in college and having babies now. But and like I said, I've known her for years, and but it was way before I recognized it about myself, and I knew that she self-medicated a lot, and I have never self-medicated. However,
you might have a lot of sensations
right.
if you self-medicate. But
no kidding. But and I knew that she did, and now I know that a lot of that kind of sometimes goes hand in hand. But
yeah, it
anyway,
does.
she came to me recently and she said, "I have to ask you a question," and she sent me a message. And I said, okay, and this is somebody that I visit with 3 or 4 times a week, and I have for the last 16 years. And she said, I know something about you, but I want to know if you know it about you. And I'm like, oh, well, okay. Mm-hmm. And I said, what is it that you know about me, And she said... And if anybody knows me knows I'm a huge smart aleck, and I like to have fun, and I'm very lighthearted. And I said, well, what is it that you know about me? And because I love to hear rumors, especially when they're about yourself. And she said, oh, no. She said, you know things, and that's the way she worded it. And I said, well, I know a whole lot of stuff. But I said, it's those random facts that really don't make any difference to anybody else, but they're really cool to me, And she knew that I was a huge history buff, and she said, no, I know that you see things because I see them. And she said, I've seen you before in another time period. And I said, okay. Mm-hmm. And I've had dreams. You and I have discussed that, reoccurring dreams. And I've had one specific reoccurring dream. I've had it since I was very, very young, and I'm not sure if it's Ireland or Germany or where, but I am in a very big castle, and I know that every girl dreams of being a princess. But I'm pretty sure I was but it's just the way that the dream,
right.
And you see the dream very first person. Mm-hmm. It's very point of view. And I've never told that to anybody except you and him.
Okay.
Jim and Lisa are the only two that I have ever told that to. And she said, I've seen you on a what are they called? On the castle when you step out onto a balcony or whatever it's called. Yeah. And she said, you stepped out on a balcony. You were in a very formal gown. It was very time period. She said, you had a crown on and you were waving. And she said, and I know this because I was in the crowd.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, that's interesting. And every hair on my body stood up. Yes. Every hair on my body stood up. And I said, so that means I was your boss. And she just laughed. And she said, I guess apparently, and I said, well, that's pretty cool. And then after she said that, I told her about my dream, of course, and that I've had it since I was a little bitty. And she said, I don't know why, but she said, you've always had that very regal kind of sense about you. And I said, oh yeah. And she said, you're just very different. She said, you're just a very different type of person. Your personality, just how you carry yourself. And she said, I have wanted to ask you that for years and years. And she said, I didn't want you to think I was crazy. And so anyway, I wonder what it's like for other people to immediately recognize it, because I'm able to recognize it a little bit better now. I still struggle. I don't think I do it very well. I mean, I can get hints, but I still don't do it very well. But I know other people can do it better than me.
I can sense energies off people, and if they have strong abilities, I don't know. It's almost, the only way I can describe it is it's almost a burning sensation in the energy. And then if it's someone that seem to have shared a past life with, it's even more so. One particular I can recall was I was actually at when we were first forming Paranormal Science Lab, and we were having a meeting, and there were several people there, and not everybody ended up going into the group, that kind of thing. But at a friend's house, and he commented that someone that was coming was running a little late because he got off work late. And okay, so we're starting, and then all of a sudden I get just this energy. It's just like tingling. It's just like burning, and I'm thinking, like, who the hell is this? So it's like I can just feel it coming. And he gets there and comes in and sits down across the room. And during the course of the evening, I notice he just kind of keeps looking at me. And never met before or anything, And this is someone that, that ultimately had a lot of gift. And, I consider he was like a brother to me. And so the second time we all were together, he just looked at me and said, "So you're psychic?" And I said, "Yeah, and so are you."
That's funny.
But it was just like, think of electricity, but almost burning, and it was like, it's like, just sense it. I can't explain why, but I really think that, I think that we are very interconnected in a lot more ways than we assume we are. That our energies are interwoven, and there's various theories in the East. In Asia, they talk about the red cord, and people who have connections are connected by a red cord, and it's never broken. It might get tangled, might get stretched, but if they are supposed to meet, they ultimately will. And that's kind of how I see energy. That the entire universe basically is a web of energy, and that we make use of it, not necessarily realizing it. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that spirits that we have dealt with in past lives, that if we're incarnated at the same time, you tend to gravitate to each other. It's like as they say with the red cord. And I think that's, when you get the saying about everything's a small world, it's a small world. I think there's a reason for that, because you end up, those coincidences and running into people and the connections, I think it has to do with that energy, and you tend to gravitate to those same people.
It almost feels like there's a tape recorder or some kind of, I don't know, like a band or cord, I guess you could say, that all of a sudden you get to a point in your life, and then you get to that reset button. Mm-hmm. And that reset button gets hit, and you don't really know for sure where you're going to go, but you get reset. And and when you get reset is when you go to your other destination, whatever life that is, or what other time period that is. Mm-hmm. And I mean, how do we know that 1817 isn't going on right now in 2017?
Well, and actually, I do think that there is a lot to that, because I mean, when you look at it from the point of view of physics and quantum physics, every point in time exists at the same time. So, I mean, it gets a little dicey when you start talking about, free will and things like that. Well, is it? Because if every moment in time is existing, a year from now is existing, 100 years from now is existing, and, we don't want to admit that. People don't want to say, things are set in motion. Now, I do believe that, certainly you can alter that, but there's so many theories that are coming out in quantum physics that kind of relate to all this. I mean, parallel universes, things like that. I mean,
time travel.
Time travel.
Time travel is a big one for me.
Time travel is something that the idea of is very captivating for me, and this show, one of our good friends that we've had on a number of times, Jason Offit, writes about it, and he and I were actually discussing this not too long ago. That there's just as so many new theories and coming out in physics that really relate to that it's going to be really interesting. It'd be really interesting to know where we're at in a few hundred years and understanding all this. But I do believe that different points in time do exist, and actually this has come up in conversation several times recently with people about why are most ghosts seen as period, Victorian or earlier, around here, Civil War ghosts, that kind of thing. Why don't we see ghosts dressed from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, And I do think there are times that you do. Mm-hmm. But, and why? I don't know. I kind of thought about it. I think maybe that spirit has been around longer and has figured out how to manipulate energy better to interact. Maybe that's why you see a ghost from 100 years ago more than one from 20 years ago. But over at the Opera House, just a few weeks ago, ghost was seen that appeared to be dressed from the 1970s. Things like that. And we investigated, and I'm not sure, did you guys go to the private mansion in Fort Scott?
No.
Okay.
We went to Lexington.
Okay. We investigated a private home up there, and one of the most eerie things that happened was a couple of investigators had stepped outside and were staying on the porch. And a car pulled up at the end of the block, and driver got out and walked up to a house, and then someone else got out the passenger side and walked over to the house and kind of stood at the sidewalk looking up. And it was a young man, and he was dressed in, say, a 1980s windbreaker and windsuit. And the shoes looked like from that time period and everything. And he just kind of stood there, and after a minute, one of our investigators said, can I help you? And he said, does Mr., and I won't give the name, but does Mr. Smith still live here? And she told him, no, he's passed away. And he said, oh, he was always very nice. And turned and walked down the sidewalk, and about 30 feet disappeared. And then talking to the owner, which was the daughter, she related that the house next door, where he was in front of when he disappeared, during that time period, she was in high school at the time period, and a young man that lived there had died in an accident, and he had always mowed their yard and stuff like that. And so they described to her what he looked like, and she said that it sounded like him, and actually went and got her old yearbook, and and they said that's what he looked like, so so it does happen, but you don't hear about it as much as the Victorian ghost type thing.
And in just with that and those people seeing, and the lady that lives in the house, she may never have seen him, but she may not have the ability.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think spirit knows who has the ability and who doesn't.
Right.
And I think to me that makes me question sometimes, are all the spirits that are with us, that makes me come to, is there really purgatory? Is that in purgatory? You know what I mean? Why are they still here? Do they not know they've moved on? Some don't. You kind of have to ask yourself, well, why are they still here, and why do they keep? There's a reason. There's got to be a reason.
Well, and I agree, and investigator that I knew years ago, and he always put it this way: we don't know what the rules are on the other side. We presume.
Right.
We presume, and religious gives us an idea. So we have this idea that they have to move on to find peace. But we don't really know that. And I often wonder, personally, I think most spirits can go back and forth across the veil. And it's their choice what they do. Mm-hmm. But I, from a lot of what I've seen, I think a lot either stay or come back. I think most probably go and come back, but that's just my thought. For a reason, and often to look over family members, or, who knows what a purpose there might be, especially if you're talking on an energy level, that there may well be a reason that they are here at times. I lived in a house once that had a portal. I used to not really, I don't know whether there are portals, that kind of thing, but lived in this house, and it was an old house, tiny house. It was a small house, and really didn't seem to have a haunting, but at night you would wake up and look up, and there would be, it was like almost looking like a hurricane cloud, just swirling, and there would be balls of light that would be kind of floating around, and some would go through the eye of it, and some would come out, and that kind of thing. And this happened a time or two, and I kept thinking, man, I'm having weird dreams. And but this went on. I mean, it started shortly after moved in, and then it just went on for months. And once or twice a week, wake up during the night, and you just watch this. And this probably had gone on for about 6 months. And my husband at the time, then he pipes up and he says, "Have you seen anything strange?"
And that when you go, whoo, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so we compared those, and so we were seeing the same thing, and that's when I decided, okay, and I've just kind of come to the conclusion over the years that they can come and go, and why or for what purpose, I'm not sure.
I think that's just the way it is.
Well, I do too.
You know what I mean? I think that's just part of it. That when I don't know that you ever physically leave.
Yeah.
I think maybe your physical body leaves, but I don't think your energy, because energy is physical.
Right.
I don't think that you physically leave ever.
Well, I think I tend to agree with Lisa that they can come back. I mean, I have no doubts, if you believe in the concept of heaven, that's where my dad went. But, you yourself have seen him from a psychic type seeing that he comes back and visits quite frequently.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that my dad's going to stick around on this plane, all the time. he's going to come back when he feels like he needs to.
Well, yeah, and I guess it's our conception that that's a one-way gate. It doesn't swing both ways.
You know, even if you're religious, I don't see. I use the word heaven as a prison.
Right, that's what I mean. It's not that you just go there and you're stuck there.
Come back and forth. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and if you believe in the concept of angels, why wouldn't they be able to come back and be, quote unquote, a guardian angel, so to speak, or just somebody to watch you?
Yeah.
I mean, I know why I saw a full body apparition of my great grandmother. She was just checking on everybody.
Yeah.
She comes and goes quite frequently. Susan has had a very lengthy conversation with her one night.
Yeah.
I don't believe that she sticks around all the time. I think she just comes and goes as she feels like she needs to.
Do you think that we physically leave energy deposits, and so we go back to those energy deposits that we leave?
It's possible.
I think we're drawn. I think just from the cases that we've been associated with, yes and no, but I think, when I pass, I think I'll be drawn back to the house that I'm in now. Mm-hmm. That's been home.
Mm-hmm. I think,
the little boy that we get, we know that wasn't his permanent residence. I mean, we've
but it
figured
was a place
that
of
out.
happiness for him.
But that was a place of happiness that he spent a lot of his summers with whatever family members did live there.
So did
he's
he
coming,
leave an energy deposit?
Yeah. But I think a lot of the places, except for the poor guy that worked the front door at the Olivia that died in the explosion, those, I think, are almost, to use the word, I know we don't like using it, but is stuck because he doesn't know what happened to him.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think that's extremely rare, too. And I think it was just because it was so instantaneous that he didn't realize what happened.
I think, some of the places that we do, they're stuck because they're. But let's take Kendrick, for example, and Carol. That was, as young as she was, that's the only happiness.
But that's all she knew.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why she's going to be there.
Right.
Although, from reports from neighbors, she does go visit.
Mm-hmm. As I'm sure she did as a child.
Mm-hmm. So I think if you're going to come back, you're either going to come back to some place you loved, or you're going to come back to visit the people you loved to check on them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we're, not to get too much into detail, but we're going to go to a house that, has some activities, and, the gut feeling I've gotten from the stories we've been told is it is going to be loved ones that are watching. And unfortunately, to get back to our topic, people don't know how to deal with those energies necessarily, because there's so much stigma placed around the paranormal.
Yeah, you're crazy.
That you're either crazy, or, unfortunately, because you see a black shape in your room, it's going to be something negative.
Yeah.
Just because, we've come to figure out that a mist or a shadow person or something may just be a spirit that's not drawing enough energy to be able to completely manifest itself.
Right. Or just the type of energy that they're drawing manifests that way.
Because for the one Lisa was just talking about, to actually manifest out of a car, walk up the sidewalk and talk, that
is amazing.
That's
amazing.
That's energy.
Well, and the two people who saw, they walked in, they were just really surprised, and is there someone that, in fact, it took them a second, even watching him disappear, it's like, wait a minute, because it was so real. And, the detail was so real, and they said, just looked as solid as anybody, and, the clothing and everything. But that was the thing. Wait a minute, it looks like he's dressed in the 1980s. And that was the only clue that it wasn't real until he disappeared.
And I think, you going back to the period clothing, I think, unfortunately for us around here, that's the places we investigate the most are that period.
Yeah.
It's going to be from the 1800s up through the 1920s or 30s because of the places we're in. That was the majority of the activity was in that time period. I would love to be able to go in the Libya and watch and have a face-to-face with Mr. Capone himself.
Yeah, well, yeah. Wouldn't we all?
And I think, honestly, let's be realistic. If we went to New York and walked in Club Studio 54, we're going to get Civil War history spirit. We're going to get 60s and 70s spirit there and had a real good time.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a fun place for them with good memories.
Yeah.
So you have to look at where you are, number one. And if you are in, where we are located, we are smack dab in the heat of Civil War.
Yeah.
You can go 40 miles in any direction and still be in the heat of Civil War.
Yeah.
So, that's what you're going to get.
And I think regardless, I don't have the abilities that you two have necessarily, but to me, when y'all see somebody, quote unquote, they're going to show themselves, especially if they're wanting to be validated by somebody, they're going to show themselves from the time period that somebody is going to remember them the most. Because the picture of my great-grandmother that Susan got was of a time period I wouldn't have remembered her, but it was a time period my mom and aunt.
Oh.
That wasn't a message. I think it was more of a message from my mom and my aunt than it was for me, even though I knew exactly who she was. And I think that's when we see a fully manifested apparition, I think they're going to manifest in a form that they're going to think somebody's going to recognize them the most.
Well, I think that's entirely possible. Yeah.
If we're going to see a gangster, they're probably going to be in a suit and tie with a fedora.
Right.
It's just...
Well,
yeah.
I think and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you, as someone that has the ability, whether it's been with them always or whether it's new like it is with me, there at some point you got to have that validation so that you know that what you're doing is correct.
Because I think otherwise it kind of drives people nuts.
Right.
Yeah.
So the biggest validation that I finally got, because you can walk up to people on the street and say that and they're going to go, oh yeah, okay. Number one, because you're weird.
Yeah.
And they want you away from them.
Yeah.
And so, but for me, when I was speaking with his aunt on the phone, and Jim and I have been married a long time, but even though a long time, there are pictures I've never seen, and there are stories I've never been told, and his great-grandmother had passed long before I ever came into the picture, and I knew his grandmother and grandfather very well, but not well enough to know what they did when they were kids. You know what I mean? I have heard stories, but not like his mother would know or his aunt would know.
Right.
And so that evening, his grandmother was so insistent. She was insistent that I don't know if she was helping me feel better, which in a way I kind of think she was, because she kept telling me, tell them about the car. Tell them about the car. Just tell them about the car. And I'm like, oh, okay, what car? What the hell, And I said to him, and I was talking to his aunt on the phone, I said, I don't know, but she wants me to tell you about the car, and it was this year, it was this color, it was, the back glass looked like this, and it was sitting next to a house, and da-da-da-da, on and on. And his aunt got very, very quiet, and she was like, tell Jim I'm going to send him a picture. I'm like, okay. And she is on her computer, and she sent him a picture of his grandmother standing next to this black car that was the same exact model, the same year, everything, with his standing in next to a house, and they were living in army housing or military housing, and his mother's oldest brother, and I think it was right when he was born, and there wasn't any other kids born yet, and he was very, very little. And she was like, she sent the picture, and I'm like, yeah, that's the car.
Yeah.
And so finally I was like, And
it's like she was letting you know, you got it.
And she basically kind of said, thank you, and went away. Yeah. I mean, it was that fast. And so, and the other thing for me that night was, I did not know that his grandmother and one of his grandfather's sisters or something like that were friends. And and it was like opposite sides of the family. And they were friends, and they bowled together or whatever. And I said, I don't know, but there's these two ladies, and they're holding hands, and they're joking, and they're laughing, and his mom and his aunt both went, oh my God. Because I couldn't have known that.
Right.
So, and that was the validation that I needed, that I wasn't crazy.
There you go. So. And that's the thing, I think people, where they go wrong is they just don't let go and trust themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, and so can you be wrong? Yes. Or sometimes something will happen and then and it doesn't seem to come to pass, and then later it does. I mean, I've had that happen before too, but, it just, I think that's the biggest lesson for me anyway, is just trust your instincts. And man has evolved based on our instincts, and they're there for a reason. And as evolution has happened, we retain what can be of use, and other things are go away over time. And so, just kind of do a fact check with yourself. Of course they say you never think you're crazy if you're crazy, but if there's no indication that you're hallucinating or out of touch with reality, and usually in those situations other people are kind of pulling you in on that. Is my experience from my professional life. If people are really out of touch with reality, there's a hint. They may not agree with it, but there's a hint. And so, absent those kinds of situations, trust it. Like you would trust, I smell apple pie, or, what I see on TV, I see it, and that's the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of times when people have a lot of contact with energy and spirit that they are feeling uncomfortable with, is that spirit is trying to communicate something and they're just not listening. Mm-hmm. They're just saying no. And as you say, sometimes it's a matter of just that validation of, this is me, or this fact, or they're trying to communicate something. There's all kinds of stories of, spirits showing up and warning people of something that's happening, or, that kind of thing. And if you just say, it's not real, it can go on and on. Mm-hmm. And so, and accepting doesn't mean you're crazy.
Right.
And I think that's the key.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Anything else that you would suggest to people if they find themselves in the situation you were?
Just try not to think that you're crazy, because you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Get your hands on some reading material and figure out what it is. Education is always best. Educate yourself on the feelings that you're feeling, and do your research on it. And that's what I did. And oftentimes it runs in families.
Yes, very much so.
So what I had to figure out is who else in my family had that ability. And I found out that, and there's actually several of them, mm-hmm. That have that ability. And I believe one of my daughters has confirmed that, and because I was there, can confirm that she does have the ability. The other daughter has it, but she's she's just not real in it right now. She does know, and I think she's a little scared of it. And God love her, she's very focused on school, so she's just not letting anything else interfere with her drive. She's a very driven young lady, and she has tunnel vision.
And I think that's a good point to make, is that, I've had experiences and gifts since childhood, but there have been times in my life that it has not gone away, but I haven't noticed it as much because I was focused on what was going on. And college was a time for that, and law school. So what's going on in your life can affect that too.
Well, she definitely recognizes that she has some kind of ability, because the little boy that we have in our house she's really the only one that he tries to communicate with. And he messes with her just like a kid brother would mess with a sister. And he'll turn her lights on and off. He'll open and shut her closet doors. And she has always been that kid. She has to leave the TV on at night because she can't go to sleep unless it is. And I know now it was to drown out everything that was going on with her.
All my kids are that way.
Yes. Well, and I will say she is academically a very gifted kid. But she will say to him, and she's dubbed him a name because we haven't figured out his name yet. But she's dubbed him Charlie, and she'll tell him, she's like, Charlie, I'm really tired. Can you please stop? and he'll stop. I mean, and he very much follows whatever command she makes. And we now have a dog. He's a puppy, but he's a very large puppy, and but he recognizes, I think, him and even the other spirit that we have there, which is his great grandmother, because his great grandmother has conveyed to me that she doesn't like his barking because he does bark a lot, and he barks a lot at things that aren't there.
Yeah.
So. But if he ever goes upstairs, the first room that he always goes to is into my daughter's room. And immediately he will immediately go up there and go into her room. And so at times you have to coax him out because he just wants to be in that room. So I know that he senses that little boy.
He's playing with a little boy.
He's playing with a little boy. So, but that's what I would say, is just do your research, figure out, because you got the gift from somebody, and figure out. And a lot of families won't talk about it. A lot of people won't talk about it. But I definitely wouldn't advertise it out there. I don't advertise it out there typically, but I just kind of, when I first started recognizing it and realizing it, I think you can kind of start realizing it and recognize it in other people that you're around all the time.
Yeah.
And so then, it wasn't hard to figure out who else in my family it was. But when I did finally go to that person and say, hey, et cetera, and they were like, yes,
Yeah.
So, and for my history, it's a very, very long line.
Same here.
Yeah. And my 3 times great grandmother was a practicing, and until the day she died, was a practicing white witch. So, be what it may, it is what it is.
Yep.
So
that's exactly. That's exactly it. Otherwise you're just fighting yourself.
Absolutely.
Anything to add, Jim?
Living with someone that.
And I think everybody needs to understand too that. As a team, we believe everybody has the capability of having some gift. It's whether you want to believe that you do or not, and trusting yourself enough to realize whether it's clairvoyance or clairaudience or empath, or there's many things that there's different types of sensitivities. Not everybody necessarily sees the pictures that.
You can definitely have more than one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are people that see and hear, all of it. But I personally think it's cool.
Never a dull moment.
And it's cool to me when she does have, somebody come through that's particularly strong, and I can see it in her eyes when it's happening, and it's like, who's coming through? And she'll be like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And but when she gets the validation from somebody, it's really, it's just cool to me.
It is, it is really neat when you get validation. Now, sometimes you don't, and I kind of experienced that last night, and person kind of laughed, but and it may be that what I got happens later. I don't know, but I find that a lot of times that when I get something and it doesn't seem to fit at that moment, it comes along later, and they go, oh. And so we'll see, but hope,
Yeah.
But I think this is a good discussion. I think it's something that a lot of people kind of shy away from hearing, and don't, because it's just you. It's just part of you. Do want to tell everyone, check out the team page, Paranormal Science Lab, on Facebook, on Twitter. New website going up. Will be up in the next couple of weeks. ParanormalScienceLab.com. And
our YouTube channel.
Paranormal Science Lab. More things will be going up on there before long too, and we're gearing up for the year. Our next event is March 11th, and personally, I'm pretty excited. I know Jim is too.
I am beyond pumped.
Very, very dear friend, Stephen LeChance is coming to Joplin. He's a researcher and author. His new book just came out, Confrontation with Evil, is an in-depth study of the Exorcist case, the real case that was the basis for Peter Blatty's book and the movie, The Exorcist. He's going to be joining us on March 11th, 2 to 4 at the Joplin Library for a lecture and book signing. And then that evening at 8 p.m., we'll be at the Kendrick House for an investigation, and Stephen's going to be there with us. It's going to be really neat. And so you'll get a chance to ask questions, have books signed, that kind of thing. So just get a hold of us if you have questions on that. The investigation with Stephen will be $25 a person, and we're going to have a really good time.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it's recommended that you get a hold of us early because the seating is limited for the investigation.
At least reserve seats, so that way we have an idea, because there's only so many people that you can get in Kendrick House.
Absolutely.
And we want everyone to have a good time. So we look forward to seeing people there. You can always, send us messages if you're curious about something, want us to talk about something in particular. We're willing to do that too, and as long as it's not too weird. And we will be back soon, probably next week, with a new podcast. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.